Jack Callahan came to the shelter for one dog. He chose Bear, the biggest, calmest of the three. But the moment Bear's cage opened, Rosie began crying, while Finn forced one paw through the bars, desperately reaching for his brother. The shelter owner lowered her voice. "They've never been separated." Jack looked at his empty truck, then at the three terrified dogs. "Open every cage," he said. He thought he was saving them. He had no idea they would one day save him. The paperwork for Gull Point Farm arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded inside a stiff white envelope that smelled faintly of dust and courthouse shelves. Jack Callahan left it unopened on the kitchen counter for nearly an hour. At 48, Jack was still a large man, 6'2", broad across the shoulders, with the heavy forearms of someone who had spent half his life pulling ropes, hauling equipment, and lifting frightened people from violent water. Time had threaded silver through his short black hair and deepened the lines around his storm-gray eyes. A narrow scar ran from beneath his right ear toward his jaw, nearly hidden beneath several days of dark stubble. His left shoulder sat slightly lower than the right, the result of an old rescue injury that stiffened whenever rain approached. People often mistook Jack's silence for calmness. It was not calmness. It was control. 8 years earlier, he had served with the United States Coast Guard. One failed rescue had ended his career, taken the life of his closest friend Owen Reed, and turned every ocean sound into an accusation. Since then, Jack had lived in temporary apartments far from the coast. He never hung pictures. He never learned his neighbors' names. He kept one packed duffel beside the door, as though leaving were an emergency procedure he practiced every night. Inside the envelope, a lawyer informed him that his aunt had died and left him Gull Point Farm, an abandoned property outside Grayport, Maine. Jack had not visited Grayport in 11 years. He packed before sunset. The only personal object he carried in his jacket was a small brass rescue whistle that had belonged to Owen. Its surface had been polished smooth by years of handling, but Jack had never blown it, not once since the night Owen disappeared beneath the waves. 2 days later, gray clouds pressed low over the highway as Jack drove north in his aging dark blue pickup. Salt marshes gradually replaced shopping centers. Pines crowded the road. Then, miles before Grayport, a hand-painted sign appeared beside a narrow driveway. Harbor Light Animal Rescue, adoptions today. Jack almost drove past. Gull Point Farm had been empty for 7 years. The lawyer's photographs showed broken fencing, a sagging shed, and a house standing alone above the water. A guard dog made practical sense. One dog, nothing more. The rescue occupied a converted bait warehouse behind an abandoned gas station. Rust marked the metal roof, and several patched windows rattled in the wind. Inside, the sharp smell of disinfectant mixed with wet fur and old timber. Linda Morgan met Jack near the front desk. Linda was 56, short and strongly built, with faded auburn hair streaked with gray and gathered into a loose knot. She wore rubber boots, a green canvas vest, and reading glasses suspended from a red cord around her neck. Her face looked tired, but her hazel eyes remained alert. She had spent 20 years rescuing animals unwanted by owners who had underestimated the cost of loyalty. The work had made her direct with people and endlessly patient with frightened creatures. "Looking for a companion?" she asked. "A working dog." Linda examined Jack's boots, weathered jacket, and rigid posture. "Farm?" "Something like that." She led him past rows of kennels toward a larger enclosure at the rear. 3 dogs stood behind separate wire doors. Bear was the largest, a Newfoundland mix with a massive black body, a white blaze across his chest, and deep brown eyes that watched Jack without fear. He was nearly 3 years old and moved with slow, deliberate confidence. Around his neck was a worn leather collar fitted with a small brass plate engraved with a lighthouse. Beside him stood Rosie, a 2-year-old border collie mix. She had black and white fur, a narrow face, and one blue eye beside one brown. Rosie remained several steps behind her kennel door, studying every movement. She was cautious rather than timid, the kind of dog that noticed a hand reaching before anyone else saw the shoulder move. Finn occupied the third kennel. The youngest and smallest, he was a red-coated heeler and beagle mix with oversized ears, quick amber eyes, and a white-tipped tail that never stopped moving. He pressed his nose through the wire, sneezed, then attempted to chew the latch. "That one is trouble," Linda said. Finn wagged harder. Jack stopped in front of Bear. The big dog came forward and sat. "Why are they separate?" "County inspection requirement. They sleep together when we have enough staff." Jack crouched. Bear sniffed his hand once, then placed one heavy paw against the kennel door. "I'll take him." Linda's expression tightened. Before she could answer, Jack noticed a printed notice taped beside the medical records. Emergency funding needed. Without assistance, Harbor Light will close in 90 days. Several kennels were already empty, not because every animal had found a home, Jack realized, but because the shelter could no longer afford to accept more. Linda unlocked Bear's door and attached a blue lead. The moment Bear stepped into the corridor, Rosie threw herself against her kennel. Her cry was sharp and raw. Finn stopped chewing the latch. He shoved one foreleg beneath the door and stretched toward Bear until his claws scraped uselessly against the concrete. Bear turned back. The big dog planted his feet and refused to move. Linda lowered her voice. "They belong to an old fisherman. He died last winter. They were found in his cabin beside the harbor, all three lying against the door. They've never been separated." Jack looked from Bear to Rosie, then to Finn's outstretched paw. For one terrible second, he remembered another hand reaching through freezing spray. Owen shouting over the storm. A rescue line snapping tight. Jack being ordered to leave one man behind so 5 others could live. He had obeyed. He had hated himself ever since. "How much for all 3? Jack asked. Linda blinked. "You came for one." "I changed my mind." 20 minutes later, Jack returned from signing the adoption papers and found Finn sitting beneath Linda's desk with Jack's truck keys between his teeth. Linda folded her arms. "He has range." Jack held out his hand. "Drop them." Finn stared at him, then ran. Bear blocked the hallway without being asked. Rosie stepped to the opposite side. Finn skidded, turned, and reluctantly released the keys into Jack's palm. It was the first thing the 3 dogs did together for him. By late afternoon, Bear occupied the rear seat, Rosie lay cautiously behind the passenger side, and Finn stood between them, trying to investigate every window at once. Jack drove into Grayport beneath a sky darkening with rain. A fisherman outside the hardware store stopped talking when he saw the truck. A woman carrying groceries stared through the windshield. An elderly man near the harbor removed his cap but said nothing. They recognized Jack Callahan. No one mentioned Owen Reed. Jack kept driving toward Gull Point, with 3 sets of eyes watching the road ahead and the brass whistle resting silently against his heart. The road to Gull Point narrowed beyond the last cluster of houses, climbing between wind-bent spruce trees before opening onto a gray stretch of coastline. Jack slowed the pickup as the farm appeared above the water. The photographs from the lawyer had not captured the full extent of the decay. The main house stood on a rocky rise with weathered cedar boards turned almost silver by salt. One side of the porch sagged toward the ground, and several roof shingles lifted whenever the wind came off the Atlantic. Behind it leaned a long storage barn with rusted hinges and one door hanging crooked from its track. Farther down the slope, a narrow dock reached into the cove, though 2 sections had collapsed and the remaining boards shuddered under each wave. Beyond the dock stood an old tidal gate system built into a stone channel. Its iron wheels were orange with rust, and reeds had grown through the mechanisms that once controlled the flow between the marsh and the sea. Jack parked facing the road out of habit. Before opening his door, he studied the property as if assessing a damaged vessel. The house could be made dry. The barn might be stabilized. The dock would need to be rebuilt or removed. He had no intention of restoring everything. His plan was simple. Repair enough of the house to live alone, clear the most dangerous structures, then sell the unused shoreline to someone with more money than sense. Bear climbed from the rear seat first. The enormous black dog stood in the wind with his white chest lifted, breathing in the salt air as though he recognized it. Rosie followed more carefully, placing one paw on the ground and pausing before committing the rest of her body. Finn launched himself from the truck, raced around the porch, discovered a loose rope, and immediately dragged it into the weeds. "Good start," Jack muttered. Inside, the house smelled of damp wood, mouse nests, and cold ash. Jack checked each room before allowing the dogs to enter. The front parlor held a stone fireplace, 2 covered chairs, and a cracked window overlooking the cove. The kitchen floor dipped near the sink. A narrow staircase climbed to 3 bedrooms beneath the damaged roof. Bear chose the front doorway within minutes. He lowered his heavy body across the threshold where he could see the yard, the road, and most of the first floor. Rosie explored quietly until Jack opened the barn door. The rusted metal rollers shrieked overhead. Rosie dropped flat, scrambled backward, and struck the wall with her shoulder. Jack released the door immediately. She retreated behind the pickup and refused to approach the barn again. He did not call her cowardly or pull her forward. Fear that strong usually had a history. Finn appeared from beneath the porch carrying one of Jack's leather gloves. By sunset, he had stolen the second glove, a screwdriver, 2 cleaning cloths, and a wooden-handled brush. Jack eventually found the entire collection beneath the lowest stair, arranged around an old blue fishing float like treasure surrounding a king. While clearing rotten boards near the kitchen, Jack noticed faint pencil lines on the pantry doorframe. Dates and initials had been written beside them. Near the bottom was a crooked mark labeled JC, age 7. Higher up appeared JC10, followed by another from the summer he turned 13. Jack touched the final line. He remembered his aunt pressing a book against his head while he accused her of measuring incorrectly. For years, Gull Point had existed in his mind only as another place he had abandoned. The marks proved it had once remembered him. The next morning, a woman arrived from the neighboring property carrying a basket covered with a striped towel. Evelyn Reed was 64, tall and slender, with silver hair braided down her back and a face made elegant by sharp cheekbones and steady green eyes. She wore a navy fisherman's sweater, dark trousers, and rubber boots polished by years of use. Grief had not made Evelyn fragile. It had made her precise. Since losing her son Owen, she had learned to speak carefully, knowing that careless words could remain in a family longer than truth. Beside her walked Harper Reed, Owen's 17-year-old daughter. Harper was medium height and wiry, with thick dark brown hair pulled into a practical knot and pale gray eyes strikingly similar to her father's. She wore a red waterproof jacket over a school sweatshirt and carried a folder stamped with the emblem of North Atlantic Maritime Academy. Harper had inherited Owen's quick intelligence and his tendency to step toward danger before deciding whether she was afraid. Unlike Evelyn, she made no effort to hide what she felt. Rosie saw Harper first. The dog left Jack's side, approached the girl cautiously, and stopped within reach. Harper lowered one hand without leaning over her. Rosie sniffed her fingers, then pressed her narrow shoulder against Harper's knee. Jack had been feeding the dog for 2 days and had received nothing close to that gesture. "Traitor," he said quietly. Harper looked up. Recognition changed her face. "You're Jack Callahan." Evelyn tightened her grip on the basket. "Harper. He's the one who came back." The words struck harder because she did not raise her voice. "My father didn't." Jack's hand moved instinctively toward the brass whistle beneath his jacket, but he stopped before touching it. Evelyn said, "We brought food and the old property maps." "You didn't have to." "No," Harper said, "we really didn't." Jack met her stare. "I'm not asking either of you for anything." "Good. Then leave Grayport before people start pretending they're glad to see you." Rosie remained beside Harper. Evelyn's expression held pain, warning, and a silence she had chosen years before. Owen had once told her that if anything happened to him, Harper must not be raised on blame. Evelyn knew Jack had followed Owen's final order, but she also knew the truth belonged first to the man who had survived it. She placed the basket on the porch. Inside were bread, chowder, and a sealed envelope containing copies of Shoreline records. Harper turned away, clutching her academy folder against her chest. Jack noticed recommendation forms through the transparent cover, several still unsigned. Before he could speak, a black luxury SUV climbed the road. Silas Grant stepped out, wearing polished brown shoes unsuited to mud and a charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than Jack's truck. Silas was 52, tall, narrow-waisted, and carefully groomed, with silver blonde hair, a smooth face, and light blue eyes that assessed land, buildings, and people by potential return. He greeted Evelyn by name, Harper with practiced warmth, and Jack as though they had already agreed to do business. "I've acquired several parcels along this coast," Silas said. "Gull Point is the missing piece. I'm prepared to offer considerably above market value." He handed Jack a folder showing plans for glass cottages, a private marina, and a cliffside restaurant. Jack looked past the drawings toward the rusted tidal gates, the damaged dock, and the house containing his childhood height marks. "I just arrived. That's why this is the best time to sell," Silas replied. Harper watched Jack as if his answer would prove something about him. Jack closed the folder and returned it. "Not today." Silas smiled without warmth. "Offers change. So do coastlines." After the SUV disappeared, Evelyn and Harper walked back toward their property. Rosie followed Harper several yards before stopping. Harper looked down at her, then toward Jack. "You should sell," she said. "At least then this place might become something useful." Rosie eventually returned when Jack called, though she looked back twice. That evening, Bear guarded the door, Finn slept beside his hidden collection, and Rosie lay facing the neighboring lights. Jack stood beside the marked doorframe while waves struck the broken dock below. He had planned to repair the house, sell the land, and disappear again. After one day at Gull Point, leaving had already become more complicated. 3 mornings after Silas Grant made his offer, Jack began working on the boathouse. The structure stood halfway between the farmhouse and the broken dock, supported by salt-darkened posts driven into the rocky shore. Its cedar siding had split along the western wall, and the roof leaked through several gaps where winter storms had torn away shingles. Jack had no immediate use for boats, but one corner of the floor had begun to collapse. If Finn found the opening before Jack repaired it, the dog would almost certainly disappear beneath the boards in pursuit of something dead, shiny, or forbidden. Bear had already established a morning routine. At sunrise, the Newfoundland mix walked down the shore, entered the freezing Atlantic without hesitation, and swam beyond the remains of the dock. His thick black coat moved through the water like a dark island. The first time Jack had shouted until his throat hurt. Bear had ignored him, completed a slow circle around the outer buoy, and returned before Jack could remove his boots. By the 4th morning, Jack simply watched with a rescue line in hand. Rosie preferred dry ground. She often sat near the path leading toward Evelyn Reed's property, listening for Harper's footsteps. Finn spent his mornings searching for additions to the collection beneath the stairs. Jack removed the weakest floorboards inside the boathouse and found rot extending farther than expected. Beneath one plank, his pry bar struck metal. The sound was too solid to be a nail. He cleared away wet sand, splintered wood, and an old fishing net until a rectangular case emerged between 2 support beams. The box was made of dark green waterproof fiberglass with corroded brass clasps. A faded strip of white paint crossed the lid. Written across it in black marker were the words, "Owen Reed, Rescue Logs." Jack stopped breathing for several seconds. The wind pushed through the broken wall, carrying the smell of kelp and distant rain. Bear stood outside the doorway, water dripping from his coat. Rosie remained farther uphill. Finn appeared beside Jack with a stolen length of rope in his mouth, sensed the change in the room, and quietly dropped it. Jack lifted the case onto a workbench. Inside lay a leather rescue journal, a compact marine voice recorder, several folded navigation charts, and a heavy iron key tagged with a brass plate. The plate was stamped with an old municipal seal and the words Gull Point Tidal Control. The journal's first pages contained weather observations, vessel descriptions, tide levels, and handwritten notes in Owen's familiar block lettering. Many later pages had been damaged by seawater. Blue ink spread across the paper in blurred clouds, turning names and coordinates into ghosts. Jack found the date of the fatal rescue. The page had fused to the one beneath it. He did not force them apart. The recorder was scratched and crusted with white salt residue. Its battery compartment had corroded shut. Jack turned it over and saw Owen's initials carved into the back. If the machine still held anything, it might contain the last words Owen ever recorded. Jack placed it back in the box. He told himself the device needed proper tools. He told himself opening it carelessly might destroy the contents. Both statements were true. Neither was the real reason he closed the lid. That afternoon, Harper arrived carrying a canvas bag of dog treats. She had begun visiting Gull Point every few days, though she claimed she came only because Rosie waited for her. Harper still wore her Maritime Academy folder beneath one arm, and Jack had noticed that the recommendation section remained incomplete. Rosie crossed the yard the moment she saw her. Harper crouched, and the dog pressed her mismatched face against the girl's chest. "You trust her quickly," Jack said. "Maybe she has good judgment." Harper volunteered 3 afternoons a week at Harbor Light Animal Rescue. Linda had told Jack that Harper spent most of her time with bonded animals, older dogs that had lived together, frightened cats surrendered from the same home, and littermates adopters wanted to divide. Since losing her father, Harper had developed little patience for people who treated attachment as an inconvenience. Jack did not tell her about the box. Instead, he drove to Harbor Light that evening after Linda called about the shelter's transport van. Its engine had been stalling whenever it carried a full load. Jack worked behind the building until dark, replacing a cracked fuel line and cleaning corrosion from the electrical connections. He refused payment and left before Linda could thank him in front of the volunteers. Harper noticed the van running smoothly the next morning. She also noticed grease beneath Jack's fingernails when she came to Gull Point. "You fixed it." "It needed fixing." "You could have told someone." Jack tightened a hinge on the porch railing. "It works whether people know who repaired it or not." Before Harper could answer, Finn darted between them. The little dog had something brass in his mouth. Jack reached for his jacket pocket and found it empty. "Finn?" The dog accelerated. He circled the porch, slipped beneath Bear's chest, then ran directly toward Harper as though delivering a prize. She caught him by the collar and removed the object from his teeth. The color left her face. The whistle rested in her palm, scratched but unmistakable. Owen's initials had been engraved near the mouthpiece. Harper had seen it in photographs taken before she was old enough to remember her father clearly. "Where did you get this?" Jack held out his hand. "Give it back." "It belonged to my father." "I know." Her fingers closed around it. "Then why do you have it?" Jack could hear the surf below the hill. For one instant it became the roar of helicopter blades and Owen's voice cutting through rain. "He gave it to me." "When?" Jack did not answer quickly enough. Harper's anger sharpened. "Before you left him?" Evelyn had reached the edge of the property and heard the final words. She stood tall in her navy coat, her silver braid moving in the wind. Pain crossed her face, but she remained silent. She knew Owen had pressed the whistle into Jack's hand before returning to the rescue line. She also knew that revealing one part of the truth without the rest might deepen the wound rather than close it. Harper stepped toward Jack. "You kept his whistle for 8 years, while my family had almost nothing from that night." "It wasn't a trophy. Then what was it?" Jack looked at the brass object in her hand. "A promise I failed to keep." Harper threw the whistle against his chest. Jack caught it before it hit the porch. "You don't deserve to carry it," she said. She walked away with Rosie following several steps behind. At the boundary, Rosie stopped and looked between them. Harper called once. Rosie hesitated, then continued after her. Later that day, Silas Grant appeared before the Grayport Town Council. The council chair, Margaret Voss, was a 60-year-old former school principal with cropped gray hair, narrow glasses, and a reputation for listening longer than developers preferred. Silas argued that removing part of the coastal dune would improve construction access and create jobs. He presented engineering renderings, revenue estimates, and signatures from owners who had already sold him their shoreline parcels. He did not mention that the dunes shielded the tidal channel during severe storms. Back at Gull Point, Jack placed Owen's whistle beside the unopened recorder. Outside, the sea struck the weakened dock in slow, heavy blows. Two objects from the same dead man waited on the table. Jack was not yet ready to hear what either one demanded of him. Jack began training the dogs because Bear nearly dragged a floating rope out to sea. The Newfoundland mix had carried it beyond the broken dock, turned against the current, and returned with the line clenched carefully between his teeth. Jack watched him climb onto the rocks, black coat streaming with water, and recognized an instinct that could be shaped into something useful. The next morning, he tied a bright orange rescue float to 20 yards of rope and led Bear into the sheltered cove. Bear entered willingly until Jack lifted Owen's brass whistle to signal the start. The first sharp note cut across the water. Bear froze, his body lowered, his ears flattened, and he backed toward shore so quickly that the rope tangled around his legs. Jack immediately lowered the whistle. Bear's fear was not disobedience. Linda later explained that the dog's former owner had kept them near an old working harbor, where whistles often sounded before engines roared, chains struck metal, and boats left for days. Jack replaced the whistle with a hand signal and a quiet command. By the third session, Bear could carry the float through chest-deep water, circle a fixed marker, and return without chewing the rope or allowing it to wrap around his legs. Rosie required a different task. Jack built a practice lane beside the barn, using stable boards, loose planks, wet stones, and a section of plywood supported only at the edges. He walked her slowly through it on a long lead. Rosie placed each paw with unusual care. When she reached the unsupported plywood, she stopped before it shifted beneath her weight. Jack waited until she looked back at him, then encouraged one short bark. The first sound was barely audible. The second was clearer. After several repetitions, Rosie learned that one bark meant the surface ahead was unsafe. Jack never forced her onto the weak section. Her value was not crossing danger. It was recognizing it before someone else did. Finn's training began with Evelyn Reed standing outside her boat repair workshop, holding a cloth that carried Jack's scent. Evelyn's workshop occupied a low blue building beside the neighboring inlet, filled with coils of rope, marine paint, wooden ribs from half-restored boats, and tools arranged with the precision of a surgeon's instruments. Finn was shown Jack's glove, released from the farm gate, and told, "Find Jack." He ran directly past Jack, crossed the yard, circled the barn, and returned from the wrong direction with a crab shell in his mouth. Harper laughed before she could stop herself. She had come reluctantly, wearing her red waterproof jacket and carrying the academy folder she still refused to discuss. Evelyn had suggested that formal rescue dog practice would strengthen Harper's scholarship application. Harper insisted she was helping only because Finn could not be trusted to find a stationary man standing 20 feet away. On the second attempt, Finn located Jack but continued running until he reached the shoreline. On the third, he found Jack, sat for half a second, then stole the scent cloth and forced everyone to chase him around the porch. By the end of the week, however, he could run between Gull Point Farm and Evelyn's workshop, find either Jack or Harper, and return with a small message pouch clipped to his harness. Training changed the rhythm between Jack and Harper. She still distrusted him, but she began watching how he worked. He never punished confusion. When Bear panicked at the whistle, Jack removed the sound rather than forcing the dog through fear. When Rosie hesitated, he waited. When Finn failed, Jack shortened the distance and repeated the task without anger. "You don't shout much," Harper said one afternoon. Shouting makes frightened people move faster, Jack replied. It doesn't always make them move correctly. You trained rescue crews like this? I trained them not to become the next person who needed rescuing. Harper absorbed that answer without admitting it mattered. She possessed Owen's ability to notice movement before others did. During a shoreline exercise, she saw a bear drifting toward a cross-current and redirected the rope before Jack spoke. But she also carried Owen's worst habit, acting before a plan was complete. When Rosie barked at a loose board near the boathouse, Harper stepped forward to test it herself. Jack caught the back of her jacket. The dog already gave you the answer. I needed to know how weak it was. No. You wanted to prove you weren't afraid of it. Harper pulled free, angry because he was right. Jack saw the difference immediately. Owen had taken risks because other lives depended on him. Harper sometimes took them because she feared caution would make her look weak. That evening, Jack completed a recommendation letter addressed to North Atlantic Maritime Academy. He described Harper's observational skill, physical courage, and instinctive understanding of rescue priorities. He also wrote that she needed to learn patience before courage turned into recklessness. He signed the letter, placed it in an envelope, and hid it inside the kitchen drawer. Harper had never asked him for one, and he doubted she would accept it if she knew. 2 days later, Rosie stopped during a search exercise near the coastal road. She lowered her head, listened, and gave one sharp bark. The road looked solid. No board shifted beneath it, no stones moved. Rosie barked again and pressed one ear toward the ground. Jack knelt beside her. Beneath the sound of wind and surf came a faint, continuous rush of water. He followed it downhill to the old tidal channel. At low tide, he could see the lower section of the gate mechanism. Rust had eaten deeply into the iron frame. One hinge had separated from the stone wall, and seawater leaked through a crack wide enough to admit Jack's fingers. The protective seawall beside it had lost mortar between several blocks. Roots and salt had widened the gaps. Harper crouched beside him. Can it fail? Not today, Jack said. That isn't the same as safe. He photographed the damage, marked the worst sections, and sent a report to Margaret Voss and the town council. Silas Grant responded publicly before the council scheduled an inspection. He claimed Jack was exaggerating ordinary coastal wear to delay development and preserve land he had previously intended to sell. Harper read Silas's statement on her phone. He's making you sound afraid of change. Jack looked toward Rosie, still watching the water beneath the road. I'm afraid of people who call a warning inconvenient. The tide began rising beyond the gate. Water pushed through the weakened stone in thin silver lines. Jack placed one hand against the cold wall and felt a faint vibration move through it. The sea was already testing every weakness Grayport had chosen not to see. For 2 nights, Jack worked on Owen's recorder after the dogs had settled. The casing resisted every tool until he soaked the screws in penetrating oil and cleaned the battery contacts with a strip of fine sandpaper. Salt had eaten through one wire near the speaker, and the internal tape mechanism dragged as though filled with grit. Jack replaced the wire, cleaned the gears, and connected the recorder to a portable power source. Bear no longer slept across the front doorway. Sometime during the previous week, the large dog had begun moving closer to Jack's chair each night. Now he lay beside the work table, his heavy head resting on one paw, watching Jack handle the device that had belonged to a dead man. Rosie remained near the window facing the tidal channel. Even when the air was calm and the moon reflected cleanly across the cove, her mismatched eyes repeatedly turned toward the old gate. Finn had contributed to the repair by finding a faded orange alarm buoy beneath the broken dock and dragging it into the kitchen. The buoy was nearly as large as he was. Its cracked bell rang every time he struck the wall. Jack carried it outside 3 times. Finn returned at 4. Shortly after midnight, the recorder moved. Static filled the room, followed by the scrape of wind across a microphone. Jack's hand froze above the controls. A male voice broke through the noise, distant but unmistakable. Owen. The sound transported Jack 8 years backward before he could prepare himself. Rain hammered a rescue helicopter. A fishing trawler leaned hard beneath waves taller than its wheelhouse. 5 civilians, a mother, her injured husband, 2 children, and the husband's elderly father, were trapped on the aft deck while Jack and Owen worked from separate lines. The recording crackled. "Callahan, take the family first." Jack closed his eyes. Another voice, his own, younger and breathless, answered through the speaker. "The line won't hold both teams." "I know. You come with us." "That's not the order." The tape dragged, then continued. Owen reported that the anchor point behind him had begun to tear free. He knew the rescue line was failing. He also knew the helicopter could not remain in position much longer. If Jack returned for him before lifting the family, everyone could be lost. Owen's final clear words came through the static. "Get them up. That's 5 lives. Don't turn 1 death into 6. Jack stopped the recorder. For 8 years, people had assumed he chose his own survival. Harper believed he abandoned her father. Jack had never corrected them because the truth did not make Owen less dead. It only proved that Jack had obeyed the man who stayed behind. He sat until dawn with the recorder between his hands. When Evelyn arrived the next morning, she found him on the porch with Bear pressed against his leg. She took one look at his face and understood that the machine had worked. "You heard him," she said. Jack nodded. Evelyn lowered herself into the chair opposite him. Her silver braid rested over one shoulder, and the wind sharpened the tired lines around her eyes. She had spent years protecting Harper from the full violence of Owen's final minutes, believing silence might allow grief to soften. Instead, silence had given anger room to invent its own explanation. "You should tell her," Evelyn said. "I will. You have said that before, without using the words." Jack looked toward the neighboring property. "She won't believe a recording I kept hidden." "She may not, but that is no longer your decision. I was trying to protect her." "No." Evelyn's voice remained controlled, which made the accusation harder. "You were punishing yourself. You let Harper hate you because part of you believed hatred was what you deserved. That may have satisfied your guilt, but it wounded a child who needed the truth." Jack had no defense that did not sound like another excuse. Harper arrived before noon, moving quickly across the path with Rosie running to meet her. She carried her Maritime Academy folder and a printed notice from Harbor Light Animal Rescue. The shelter's financial deadline had arrived sooner than expected. Because of a failed heating system and insufficient funds, every animal had to be transferred before the weekend. "They need the transport van and at least 4 drivers," Harper said. "A storm system is forming offshore, so Linda wants them moved before the roads flood." Jack stood. "I'll help." Harper glanced toward the recorder on the porch table. "What is that?" He should have answered immediately. Instead, Jack reached for the machine and said, "There's something you need to hear, but I need to explain it first." Finn appeared beneath the table carrying the alarm buoy's frayed pull cord. The buoy struck a porch post with a hollow clang. Rosie startled and moved toward Harper. In the confusion, Jack accidentally pressed the recorder's playback switch. Owen's voice filled the porch. "Callahan, take the family first." Harper stopped moving. The recording skipped. Salt damage swallowed several seconds. When the sound returned, only fragments remained. "Line won't hold. You come with us." "That's not the order." Then silence. Harper looked at Jack. "How long have you had this?" "I found it beneath the boathouse floor." "When?" "Days ago." "And you said nothing. I had to repair it. You repaired the parts that make you look innocent?" Jack's jaw tightened. "That isn't what happened. But you expect me to trust the only section you chose to play? I didn't choose that section." Finn hit the control. Harper laughed once without humor. "Of course, the dog did it." Jack reached for the recorder, but Harper took it first. "There is more on this." "Yes." "Then I'll listen without you deciding what I'm allowed to hear." "Harper, the tape is damaged. So was my family." She walked away before Evelyn could stop her. Rosie followed several steps, then looked back at Jack. This time she did not return. While Jack's truth left Gull Point in Harper's hands, Silas Grant moved machinery onto the northern dunes. The council had not approved full construction, but Silas claimed he possessed temporary access rights for surveying and soil preparation. 2 excavators cut a broad path through the protective ridge, removing beach grass and flattening the highest section facing the sea. Workers operated beneath a written order that described the work as minor grading. Margaret Voss called Silas directly and demanded that he stop. Silas argued that Jack's warnings had created unnecessary panic and that the approaching storm was still days away. By the time the machines withdrew, a wide gap had been opened between the Atlantic and Grayport's lowest streets. At Gull Point, Rosie stood on the distant path beside Harper and turned her head toward the tidal gate. One sharp bark crossed the quiet afternoon. Jack heard it from the porch. Beyond the damaged dunes, the sea was rising. The nor'easter changed direction 3 hours before sunset. Weather reports had predicted that the center would pass east of Grayport, bringing heavy rain but sparing the town the strongest winds. Instead, the storm turned west over the Gulf of Maine and drove directly toward the coast. By 4 o'clock, waves were breaking over the damaged dunes Silas Grant had ordered flattened, and seawater had begun spreading across the marsh behind them. At Harbor Light Animal Rescue, Linda Morgan abandoned the original evacuation schedule. The shelter's heating system had failed completely. Water was entering beneath the rear door, and 23 dogs and 16 cats had to be moved to a reinforced storage barn on higher ground. Linda wore a yellow raincoat over her green canvas vest, her gray-streaked hair escaping its knot as she directed volunteers with the controlled urgency of someone who had survived too many emergencies to waste time pretending not to be afraid. Harper arrived before Evelyn could stop her. She carried Owen's recorder inside the chest pocket of her red jacket, though she had not yet listened beyond the damaged section she heard at Gull Point. Anger toward Jack remained, but it had become less certain, weakened by questions she was not ready to answer. Linda assigned Harper to the shelter's transport van because she knew the coastal road better than the other volunteers. Beside them worked Noah Bell, a 14-year-old volunteer with a thin frame, sandy hair, and large glasses that constantly slid down his nose. Noah spoke quietly around adults, but became fearless around frightened animals. After losing his family's dog in a house fire 2 years earlier, he had begun volunteering every weekend, believing no animal should face terror without someone nearby. The first trip reached the storage barn safely. On the second, wind pushed the van across the center line twice. Metal cages rattled behind Linda and Harper, while covered carriers filled with cats shifted against their restraints. Noah followed in a smaller utility vehicle carrying blankets, food, and emergency supplies. Near the tidal channel, water suddenly crossed the road through the gap in the dunes. It began as a shallow sheet, then rose over the van's tires within seconds. Linda pressed the accelerator, but the engine coughed as salt water reached the lower intake. The van rolled another 20 feet and stopped. Behind them, Noah's utility vehicle stalled near the entrance to the old pumping station. Linda tried the radio. Static answered. Harper looked through the rain-streaked rear window and saw Noah leave his vehicle. The boy struggled toward the pumping station carrying a cat carrier against his chest. A loose section of fencing collapsed between him and the van. Before Linda could stop her, Harper opened the passenger door. "He's alone," she said. Linda caught her sleeve. "The road is moving." "Then he has even less time." Harper pulled free and disappeared into the storm. At Gull Point, Evelyn activated an old marine radio inside her workshop. The device was nearly 30 years old, housed in a cream-colored metal casing with a cracked frequency dial, but Evelyn maintained it because Owen had taught her that modern equipment failed most often when people needed it most. Her voice moved across the emergency channel, calm and exact. "Harbor Light transport disabled on Coastal Route 7. Multiple animals aboard. 2 volunteers separated near the Grayport pumping station." Jack heard the message through a handheld receiver while securing shutters at the farmhouse. Rosie was already standing at the eastern gate, staring toward town. Bear paced near the shore, and Finn barked each time wind struck the porch. Jack loaded rescue rope, reflective vests, a first aid kit, flotation harnesses, and the orange buoy Finn had dragged from beneath the dock. He left his truck at Evelyn's workshop because the lower road was already impassable. Evelyn met him outside, her silver braid hidden beneath a rain hood. "Harper has the recorder," she said. Jack tightened Bear's harness. Right now, she needs a way home more than she needs the truth. Evelyn handed him Owen's old waterproof radio pouch. "Then bring her one." Jack approached the flooded road on foot with the 3 dogs secured to separate leads. The familiar pavement had disappeared beneath a fast-moving channel filled with branches, broken signs, and pieces of dune fencing. The harbor light van stood 30 yards away, tilted slightly toward the marsh. Linda flashed a light through the windshield. Between Jack and the vehicle, the shoulder of the road had begun collapsing into the drainage ditch. Rosie lowered her head and stepped forward carefully. Twice she stopped and gave a single sharp bark. Jack tested each area with a long fiberglass pole and found empty space beneath the water where asphalt had already washed away. Following Rosie, he moved across a narrow strip of submerged stone that remained firm beneath the current. Bear carried the rescue line. At Jack's signal, the large dog entered the water without hesitation. The current pushed against his broad chest, but he kept his head high and swam toward the van with the rope secured to his flotation harness. Linda opened the driver's window far enough to grab the line. Jack anchored the opposite end around a granite marker post, creating a guide between stable ground and the stranded vehicle. A cracking sound rose above the storm. Part of the old dock, torn loose from the shoreline, came spinning through the flooded channel. Jack turned too late. A waterlogged plank struck his left shoulder and knocked him to one knee. Pain flashed down his arm, sharp enough to blur his vision. Rosie pulled backward against her lead. Bear stopped swimming and looked toward him. Jack forced himself upright. His shoulder moved, but only barely. "Keep going," he told Bear. The dog turned and completed the crossing. Jack reached the van by following the secured line. Linda had already begun fastening smaller carriers to a floating cargo sled. "Harper went after Noah," she said. "Pumping station." Jack looked toward the low concrete building beyond the broken fence. Water surrounded it on 3 sides. The automatic tidal gates should have redirected the surge toward the outer channel, but the corroded mechanism had failed. Through the rain, Jack could see one gate hanging half open while the other remained locked in place. Each incoming wave forced more water toward the station and Grayport's lowest streets. A white luxury SUV sat farther down the submerged road with its hazard lights flashing. Silas Grant stood on the roof, his expensive overcoat soaked black and one polished shoe missing. The man who had dismissed Jack's warnings now clung to a luggage rail while fishermen from a nearby house stretched a rope toward him. Silas shouted that his vehicle contained important planning documents. No one attempted to save the documents. A broad-shouldered lobsterman pulled Silas into a flat-bottomed skiff and ordered him to sit down. For once, Silas obeyed without negotiating. Jack gave Finn Harper's scarf, which Linda had found beneath the passenger seat. The little dog pressed his nose into the wet fabric, then turned toward the pumping station. Jack unclipped the long tracking line. "Find Harper." Finn ran past the broken fence, overshot the entrance by several yards, stopped, and circled back. His nose remained low as he followed Harper's scent through a strip of reeds and around the deepest section of water. Rosie led Jack over the remaining stable ground, barking once whenever the surface shifted. Bear stayed on Jack's injured side, close enough that his heavy shoulder occasionally steadied him. At the pumping station door, Finn scratched twice, then squeezed through a gap where the lower panel had been damaged. A moment later, his barking echoed from inside. Jack forced the door open. Cold water rushed around his boots. Emergency lights flashed red across concrete walls, broken gauges and pipes trembling under pressure. Somewhere below, a pump motor screamed and stopped. Finn's bark came from a stairwell descending into darkness. Then Harper shouted Noah's name. Jack looked down the flooded steps. The water was still rising. Owen's recorder remained inside Harper's jacket, and the failed tidal gate groaned beneath the weight of the sea. Jack descended the flooded stairwell with Finn ahead of him, and Rosie pressed close to his injured side. Bear remained near the entrance, where the rescue line stretched back toward Linda's stranded van. Water reached Jack's knees before he found Harper and Noah on a narrow maintenance platform above the lower pump chamber. Noah sat against the wall with a cat carrier clutched to his chest. His glasses were gone, blood marked one temple, and his thin body shook beneath a soaked sweatshirt. Inside the carrier, a gray cat hissed whenever the floor vibrated. Harper stood between the boy and the rising water, one hand gripping a rusted railing. Owen's recorder remained inside her jacket. "The stairs collapsed behind us," she said. "The emergency exit is locked." Jack examined the chamber. The automatic pumps had stopped, but seawater continued pouring through a cracked intake pipe. Across the room, behind a section of waist-deep water, stood the manual control wheel connected to Gull Point's tidal gate. If the gate remained half-closed, the surge would continue forcing water into Grayport. Opening it fully would redirect part of the current into the outer channel. "I can reach the wheel," Jack said. Harper looked at his left arm hanging stiffly beside him. "You can barely move your shoulder." "I only need the right one." "And after you open it?" Jack studied the corroded mechanism. The wheel had to be held until the locking bar dropped into place. If the bar failed, someone would have to remain behind. Harper recognized the answer in his silence. "No." "Get Noah upstairs when the rescue team arrives. You're not staying here. This is not a discussion." "That is exactly what my father said before he died." Her words stopped him more effectively than the pain. A violent shudder passed through the building. Rosie gave one sharp bark and pulled Jack backward. A section of concrete broke loose where he had been standing and vanished beneath the brown water. Jack looked down at her. "Good warning." Rosie refused to move away from him. Harper reached for the dog's lead, but Rosie planted all four paws until Harper stepped beside Jack. Only then did the border collie allow herself to be guided toward the platform. Above them, Bear heard cages shifting inside the transport van. Linda had secured most of the animals to the guide rope, but one floating cargo sled had broken loose. A large carrier containing 3 frightened cats spun toward the flooded ditch. Bear entered the current, reached the trailing strap, and pulled the carrier back toward the van. Waves struck his broad black body, yet he kept the strap between his teeth until Linda caught it and fastened the carrier to the main line. Inside the pumping station, Harper removed Owen's recorder while searching her pocket for a flashlight. The device struck the railing. Its damaged playback switch moved. Static filled the chamber. Then Owen's voice emerged through the speaker. "Callahan, take the family first." Harper froze. The recording continued beyond the section she had heard at Gull Point. Jack's younger voice argued that the rescue line would not hold. Owen answered with steady urgency. "That's 5 people in the basket. You lift them now." "What about you?" "I'll hold until they're clear." The sound of wind nearly swallowed the next words. "If you make it back, don't spend your life dying with me. Go home, Jack. Live enough for both of us." A metallic snap followed. Owen's final message ended beneath alarms and roaring water. Harper stared at Jack as 8 years of anger collapsed into something more painful. "He ordered you to leave." "Yes." "You saved those people." "Yes." "And you let everyone believe I came back." "He didn't." "That wasn't your choice." Jack turned toward the control wheel. "It became my punishment." Harper closed her hand around the recorder. "Then stop punishing him too. He told you to live." Another surge struck the station. Water climbed over the platform's lowest edge. Jack secured a rope around his waist and crossed toward the control wheel while Bear held the outer line at the doorway. Harper followed despite Jack's order to remain behind. Together they forced the wheel to turn. Rust broke loose in orange flakes. The mechanism moved several inches, stopped, then groaned forward again. Outside, Finn heard an emergency bell striking weakly near the harbor. During training, he had repeatedly stolen the frayed rope attached to the old alarm buoy. Now he seized the pumping station's bell cord and pulled with his entire body. The bell sounded once, then again, carrying through the storm. At the harbor, Captain Daniel Price heard it. Daniel was 45, lean and weathered, with close-cropped brown hair, a broken nose, and the patient severity of a man who had spent 20 years commanding rescue boats through bad decisions made by other people. He had already assembled a 6-person harbor rescue unit, but flooded streets had hidden the pumping station entrance. Finn's bell gave them a direction. When the dog appeared through the rain, barking and running back toward the station, Daniel followed without hesitation. Silas Grant sat wrapped in a blanket aboard the fisherman's skiff when the rescue crew passed. Shame had stripped the confidence from his face. The dune cut was ahead of schedule, he admitted. We opened the northern section yesterday. The water will be moving through the service trench. Daniel immediately redirected 2 crew members toward the trench, using Silas's confession to predict the strongest flow. Inside the station, Jack and Harper pushed the wheel through its final turn. The tidal gate opened with a deep mechanical roar. Water reversed through the lower channel, pulling away from Grayport streets. The locking bar began to descend, but caught halfway. Daniel and 2 rescuers arrived before Jack could volunteer to remain behind. They attached a chain hoist to the bar and forced it into place. The gate locked open. Noah was lifted first, still holding the cat carrier. Harper followed with Rosie. Bear remained braced against the rescue line until Linda and the final animals crossed to firm ground. Finn ran between the team members, barking whenever anyone moved away from the group. When rescuers placed a stretcher beside Jack, he started to refuse it. His shoulder had swollen beneath his jacket, and exhaustion made the floor tilt beneath him. Harper stood in front of him. No one stays behind. Jack looked at Bear holding the line, Rosie waiting beside Harper, and Finn guarding the stairwell. Then he lay down on the stretcher. For the first time since Owen's death, Jack allowed other people to carry him home. By morning, the nor'easter had moved north, leaving Grayport beneath a pale sky and a coastline transformed by mud, broken timber, and salt water. The lowest streets remained flooded, but the tidal gate Jack and Harper had opened prevented the surge from reaching the town center. Gull Point Farm lost part of its dock, several porch boards, and 1 section of fencing. The farmhouse still stood. Jack returned from the hospital 2 days later, with his left arm secured in a sling and strict instructions not to lift anything heavier than a coffee pot. He found Bear waiting across the front doorway, Rosie seated beside the damaged path, and Finn running circles around Evelyn's truck. Harper stood behind them holding Owen's recorder. She did not apologize immediately. Neither did Jack. Some wounds required truth before they could accept words. The doctor said 6 weeks, Harper said. 4. They said 6. Jack looked toward Evelyn. You brought an enforcer. I raised one, Evelyn replied. Harper stepped closer. For years, she had called him Mr. Callahan, usually with enough distance in her voice to make the title sound like an accusation. This time she said, Welcome home, Jack. The name settled between them more gently than forgiveness, but it carried the beginning of it. The investigation into Silas Grant's development project began within the week. Documents recovered from his flooded SUV showed that he had ordered the dune grading before receiving final approval. The town council canceled the resort agreement, suspended all construction permits connected to his company, and required him to contribute to the restoration costs. Silas attended the hearing in a plain gray suit, no longer smiling as though every room belonged to him. He admitted that he had valued speed over caution and profit over the people living below the dunes. His confession did not erase the damage, but it prevented him from hiding behind contractors and paperwork. Margaret Voss introduced a permanent coastal protection plan. The damaged dunes would be rebuilt with native grass. The marsh surrounding the tidal channel would become protected land, and the old gate system would be restored under municipal control. Gull Point's surviving shoreline would remain undeveloped as part of a public emergency buffer. Jack had once planned to sell that land. Standing before the council with Harper and Evelyn beside him, he signed the conservation agreement without hesitation. Grayport repaired more than the coastline. Fishermen brought lumber to Gull Point. Retired electricians rewired the barn. Students cleared storm debris from the marsh. The same residents who had watched Jack return in silence now arrived carrying tools, food, roofing sheets, and envelopes of cash. Donations intended for the farm soon exceeded the repairs required. Jack redirected the remainder to Harbor Light Animal Rescue. Linda Morgan refused the money at first. "The farm needs it." "The farm has walls," Jack said. "Your animals need somewhere to go." Linda looked across the repaired barn, the fenced exercise yard, and the empty stalls that could be converted into kennels. Maybe they already have somewhere. That suggestion became Three Tides Rescue Center. Linda accepted the position of director after Jack promised he would not interfere with medical decisions, adoption standards, or feeding schedules. She moved through the renovated barn with her reading glasses hanging from their red cord, assigning volunteers before anyone officially called her their manager. Her patience with damaged animals remained endless. Her patience with incomplete paperwork did not. Evelyn converted the former storage room beside the boathouse into a small coffee counter called the Open Door. She served strong coffee, chowder, and bread to volunteers, fishermen, and rescue crews. A wooden jar on the counter collected donations for emergency veterinary care. Evelyn claimed the counter was temporary. No one believed her after she installed shelves and painted the walls blue. Harper received her scholarship to North Atlantic Maritime Academy. The missing professional recommendation arrived in an envelope bearing Jack's signature. She read the letter twice, including the sentence warning that her courage sometimes moved faster than her judgment. Instead of becoming angry, she asked the academy to let her continue volunteering at Three Tides. By summer, she became the youngest assistant instructor in the center's canine rescue program. She taught volunteers how Bear carried flotation lines, how Rosie detected unstable ground, and how Finn followed scent trails despite occasionally passing the target first. One Saturday, a family arrived to meet two elderly spaniels named Molly and Max. The dogs were 12 years old, nearly deaf, and had spent their entire lives together before their owner entered assisted living. The prospective adopters were Thomas and Rachel Miller, a quiet couple in their early 40s, accompanied by their 10-year-old son, Ethan. Thomas was broad and soft-spoken, with carpenter's hands and a patient manner. Rachel had curly brown hair, warm eyes, and the calm attentiveness of a school nurse accustomed to frighten children. Ethan knelt between the spaniels while both rested their gray muzzles on his legs. Linda explained that adopting one would be easier and less expensive. Rachel shook her head. "They've already lost their home. They shouldn't lose each other." Jack stood near the kennel door while Bear leaned against his uninjured side. He remembered 3 cages, Rosie's cry, and Finn's paw reaching beneath metal bars. "Prepare both sets of papers," he said. That evening, Jack met Harper beside the new sign at the farm entrance. He removed Owen's brass whistle from his pocket and placed it in her hand. "It belongs with you." Harper studied the worn metal. "He gave it to you." "He was your father." "He was your family too." Instead of taking it home, she carried the whistle into the main building and hung it inside a glass case beside Owen's recorder and the restored title gate key. Beneath them, she placed a small card, for those who held the line and those who came back. Outside, Jack and Harper raised the cedar sign together. Three Tides Rescue Center. Below it were the words, "Every life deserves a way home." As sunset colored the repaired dunes gold, Bear settled across the front doorway, watching the road and the sea. Rosie walked through the kennel aisle, pausing at every gate until each animal was calm. Finn appeared from the workshop with one of Jack's leather gloves in his mouth. "Finn!" Jack called. The little dog ran faster. Harper laughed and moved aside as Finn charged into the farmhouse. Jack followed him through the open door, with Bear rising behind him, and Rosie completing one final check before joining them. The sea still struck the rocks below Gull Point. It would always test the walls, the gates, and the people who lived beside it. But the house no longer faced the angry water alone. Every tide that had taken something from them had also carried them toward this place. And now, everyone who belonged there knew the way home. Sometimes, God does not answer our prayers by removing the storm. Sometimes He sends us the strength to face it. A faithful friend, an open door, or even 3 loyal dogs who refuse to leave us behind. Jack believed his life had been defined by the man he could not save, but God used Bear, Rosie, Finn, Harper, and an entire town to remind him that guilt was never meant to be his permanent home. Grace was still waiting for him, and so was a family. Perhaps you are carrying a burden no one else can see. Perhaps you feel forgotten, broken, or too far from home. But God has not abandoned you. Even in your darkest season, He may already be placing guardians along your path and preparing a door that will open at exactly the right time. If you believe God can turn pain into purpose and lead every lost heart home, write Amen in the comments. Tell us, who has God sent into your life when you needed help the most? Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you will not miss our next unforgettable story of loyalty, faith, healing, and second chances.